The alarm screamed through the corridors of the distant Hope like a wounded animal. Danny Vance gripped the edge of his command console and stared at the flickering screen in front of him. The numbers made no sense. They could not be real, but the computer did not lie, and the truth was simple and terrible. The engines were dead. He turned to face his bridge crew. Their faces held the same fear he felt in his own chest. These were not soldiers. They were farmers, and teachers, and engineers, who had signed up for a new life on a distant world. Now they floated in the darkness between stars with no way to move and no place to hide. Danny was 43 years old. He had gray in his hair and lines on his face from years of hard work. He had led this colony ship for 18 months, guiding 1,400 souls across the void toward a planet they would never reach. Not like this. He pressed the communication button. His voice was steady even though his hands shook. "This is Commander Danny Vance of the colony vessel Distant Hope. We have experienced catastrophic engine failure at coordinates 773x429. We require immediate assistance. Please respond." The message flew out into the darkness. Minutes passed. Then hours. The crew waited in silence, watching the stars through the viewports and praying to whatever gods they believed in. The response came at last. A crackling voice filled the bridge, distant and faint but clear enough to understand. "Distant Hope. This is Fleet Outpost Gamma. We have received your distress call. Reinforcements are being dispatched to your location. Estimated arrival time is 14 days. Repeat. 14 days. Hold your position and conserve resources. Help is coming. 14 days. Danny closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. They could survive 14 days. They had food and water and air. They would be afraid and uncomfortable, but they would live. Then the sensor officer spoke, and everything changed. "Commander, I am detecting multiple contacts on long-range scanners. They are approaching fast." Danny moved to the sensor station and looked at the display. His blood turned to ice. 200 ships. 200 warships bearing down on them from the outer dark. He knew those ship designs. Everyone in human space knew them. The angular hulls and glowing weapon ports belonged to the Vrethkai, the conquerors, the destroyers, the species that had wiped out 3 human colonies in the past decade alone. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They came, they killed, and they moved on. That was their way. "How long until they reach us?" Danny asked. 6 hours, Commander. 6 hours. He had 6 hours to prepare 1,400 civilians for an attack by 200 warships, full of alien soldiers bred for nothing but war. He activated the ship-wide communication system. His voice echoed through every corridor, every cabin, every corner of the Distant Hope. "All hands. This is Commander Vance. We have an emergency situation. All security personnel report to the main cargo bay immediately. All civilians, please remain calm and await further instructions. I repeat, remain calm." He turned to his first officer. "Find Katie Morgan. Bring her to me now." Katie Morgan was 31 years old. She had short brown hair and hard eyes that had seen too much death in too few years. Before joining the colony mission, she had served in the border conflicts, fighting the small skirmishes that never made the news but always claimed lives. She was the chief security officer of the Distant Hope, responsible for the safety of everyone aboard. She had 86 people under her command, 86 security officers armed with basic weapons and trained for crowd control, not warfare. Against the Vrethkai, they might as well have been children with sticks. She listened in silence as Danny explained the situation. Her face showed no fear. It showed nothing at all. "How many soldiers do the Vrethkai have?" she asked. "If every ship is fully crewed, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. Katie nodded slowly. She looked out the viewport at the distant stars. Thinking, 14 days, she said. "We need to hold for 14 days. Can it be done?" She turned to face him. "I do not know. But we do not have a choice, do we?" Danny shook his head. "No, we do not." Katie left the bridge and made her way to the cargo bay. Her security team waited for her there, standing in neat rows with worried eyes. She climbed onto a cargo container so they could all see her. "Listen to me," she said. In 6 hours, the Vrethkai will be here. You all know what that means. They will try to board this ship. They will try to kill everyone aboard. They expect us to surrender or die quickly. We are going to do neither. Thanks for watching. She paused and let her words sink in. We cannot win a straight fight. We are outnumbered and outgunned. But this ship is our ground. And we know it better than they ever will. We will use that. We will make them pay for every corridor they take. We will fight smart, and we will fight hard, and we will hold the line until help arrives. A young officer raised his hand. Chief, what about the civilians? Katie's jaw tightened. The civilians are why we fight. They are the farmers who will grow food on new worlds. They are the teachers who will raise the next generation. They are the children who will build the future. We protect them, or we die trying. There is no other option. She jumped down from the container and began giving orders. Teams were assigned to different sections of the ship. Weapons were distributed. Barricades were built from whatever materials they could find. In the medical bay, Dr. Leo Castillo prepared for the wounded he knew would come. He was a gentle man with kind eyes and steady hands. He had become a doctor to save lives, not to patch up soldiers between battles. But War did not care about his preferences. In the engineering section, Maria Reyes studied the ship's systems and began planning. She was brilliant with machines, able to fix anything with enough time and spare parts. Now she turned her mind to a darker purpose. If she could not fix the engines, she could at least build weapons, traps, surprises for the enemy. Throughout the ship, the civilians huddled in their quarters and waited. Mothers held their children close. Husbands and wives said quiet words to each other. Old men and women who had lived through other wars recognized the look in the eyes of the young. 6 hours passed like minutes. The Vrethkai arrived. Their ships surrounded the distant Hope like wolves circling wounded prey. Boarding pods launched from their hulls, streaking toward the colony vessel in waves of fire and metal. On the bridge, Danny Vance watched them come. His hand rested on the console, steady and still. All hands, he said quietly. The enemy is here. Remember what we are fighting for. Remember who we are protecting. Hold the line. The first boarding pod slammed into the outer hull with a sound like thunder. The walls shook. Somewhere in the distance, Katie Morgan raised her weapon and prepared to meet the enemy. The battle for the distant Hope had begun. The first wave of Vrethkai soldiers poured through the breached hull like water through a broken dam. They were tall and gray-skinned, with 4 arms and eyes that glowed red in the emergency lighting. Their armor was black and covered with spikes. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. They expected to find terrified civilians running and screaming. They expected easy prey. Instead, they found Katie Morgan and her team waiting in the darkness. The corridor exploded with weapons fire. Katie crouched behind a makeshift barricade and fired shot after shot into the advancing aliens. Beside her, her officers did the same. The Vrethkai fell in waves, their bodies piling up in the narrow passage, but more kept coming. Always more. Fall back to position 2, Katie shouted over the noise of battle. Her team retreated in good order, firing as they moved. They had practiced this drill a dozen times in the 6 hours before the attack. Every corridor had a fallback point. Every junction had a trap waiting. The first trap was simple. Maria Reyes had rigged a section of ceiling to collapse when triggered. As the Vrethkai advanced through the corridor, Katie pressed the button on her communicator. 2 tons of metal crashed down on the enemy soldiers, crushing them beneath the rubble. It bought them 10 minutes. 10 precious minutes to regroup and prepare for the next assault. On the bridge, Danny Vance coordinated the defense like a conductor leading an orchestra. He watched the ship's internal sensors, tracking both the defenders and the attackers. When a corridor was about to be overrun, he sealed the bulkheads. When a section lost power, he rerouted energy from elsewhere. He turned the distant Hope into a maze of dead ends and deadly surprises. Section 7 is holding, he reported to Katie through the communication system. But Section 4 is taking heavy fire. Can you send reinforcements? Negative, Katie replied, Her voice was tight with strain. "We are stretched too thin. Tell them to fall back to Section 3 and seal the doors behind them." Danny nodded and relayed the order. He hated this. He hated sending people to fight and die while he sat safe on the bridge. But he knew his place. His job was to see the whole picture, to make the hard choices so others did not have to. The first day of fighting lasted 12 hours. When the Vrethkai finally pulled back to regroup, the humans had lost 9 defenders. The enemy had lost over 100. Katie gathered her surviving team in a maintenance room deep in the ship. Their faces were covered with sweat and grime. Their hands shook from exhaustion, but their eyes still held fire. "Good work," she said. "We hurt them today. We showed them that humans do not break easily. But this was only the beginning. They will come again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. We need to be ready." She divided her people into 3 shifts. While one group fought, another rested, and the third prepared defenses. It was the only way to keep going. No one could fight around the clock, not even the best soldiers in the galaxy. The civilians did not sit idle. Dr. Leo Castillo worked through the night, treating the wounded and training volunteers to assist him. He was gentle with his patients, speaking soft words of comfort as he stitched wounds and set broken bones, but inside, his heart ached with every life he could not save. Maria Reyes slept in 2-hour shifts between building more traps. She turned spare parts into explosive devices. She rigged doors to electrocute anyone who forced them open. She converted maintenance robots into mobile bombs that rolled toward the enemy and detonated on contact. The teenagers of the ship formed supply chains. They carried ammunition, water, and food to the front lines. They were too young to fight, but they refused to hide, while others bled for them. A boy named Jack, only 15 years old, ran through corridors filled with gunfire to deliver medical supplies to a wounded officer. He was terrified, but he did not stop. Day 2 was worse than day 1. The Vrethkai learned from their mistakes. They moved more carefully, checking for traps before advancing. They brought heavier weapons that punched through the barricades like paper. Katie lost 4 more people. The enemy lost 200. Day 3 brought a new horror. The Vrethkai released hunting beasts into the ship, creatures with 6 legs and jaws full of razor teeth. They moved fast and attacked without warning. 2 civilians died before Katie's team could kill the beasts. Danny watched the casualty reports pile up on his screen. He had not slept in 3 days. His eyes burned and his head pounded. But he would not rest. Not while his people were dying. On day 4, the Vrethkai commander grew frustrated. He had expected to conquer this ship in hours. Instead, his soldiers were dying by the hundreds against prey that refused to behave like prey. He ordered a full assault on the main cargo bay, where most of the civilians had gathered. If he could not beat the defenders, he would simply kill everyone they were protecting. Katie received the warning from Danny's sensors. She had 15 minutes to prepare. She looked at the civilians huddled in the cargo bay. Mothers with children. Old couples holding hands. Young people who had dreamed of building a new world. They looked back at her with eyes full of trust and fear. "Everyone who can hold a weapon, step forward," she said. 47 civilians volunteered. Maria handed out whatever she could find. Pipes, tools, kitchen knives, anything that could hurt or kill. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary people who had never fought anyone in their lives. But they stood in line beside the trained officers, ready to defend their families. The assault came like a storm. Vrethkai soldiers flooded the corridors leading to the cargo bay, firing as they advanced. The defenders fired back, filling the narrow passages with death. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Vrethkai had been pushed back. But the cost was terrible. 17 defenders lay dead, including 12 civilians who had picked up weapons for the first time that day. Katie sat alone in a storage closet after the battle. Her hands shook. Her chest heaved with silent sobs. She had watched good people die. People who trusted her to keep them safe. But she did not have time to grieve. Not yet. There were still 10 days to go. She wiped her eyes, stood up, and walked back to her post. The defenders needed their leader. She would be strong for them, even if she felt like breaking inside. On the bridge, Danny received a message from one of his officers. The water recycling system had been damaged in the fighting. They had maybe 5 days of water left. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then, he started working on a solution. 14 days suddenly seemed like forever. By day 10, the distant hope had become a graveyard. The corridors were littered with debris and scorched by weapons fire. The lights flickered constantly, sometimes dying for hours before Maria could restore power. The air smelled of smoke and blood and fear. Every breath reminded the survivors of what they had lost. Katie Morgan had not slept more than 2 hours at a time in over a week. Her eyes were red and hollow. Her uniform was torn in 3 places and stained with things she did not want to think about. She had started the siege with 86 security officers. Now she had 54. 32 good people had died under her command. She remembered every face, every name, every last breath. The civilians had suffered too. The brave volunteers who joined the fight on day 4 were mostly gone now. Ordinary people who had never hurt anyone in their lives had picked up weapons and given everything they had. The ones who survived carried wounds that would never fully heal. The ammunition was almost gone. Maria had converted nearly every spare part on the ship into weapons or traps. There was nothing left to build, nothing left to sacrifice. And still the Vrethkai came. They had lost over 1,500 soldiers trying to take the ship. Any normal enemy would have retreated long ago. But the Vrethkai did not believe in retreat. Their culture demanded victory or death. They would rather lose their entire army than admit defeat to humans. On the morning of day 10, the enemy breached the inner sanctuary. The humans had retreated to the core sections of the ship, sealing themselves behind the strongest bulkheads they had. It was supposed to hold for days. The Vrethkai cut through it, in hours. They poured into the inner corridors like a flood of gray death. The fighting became close and brutal. There was no room for careful tactics or clever traps. It was just bodies pressed against bodies, weapons firing at point-blank range, hands grabbing and tearing and killing. Katie led a counterattack that pushed the enemy back from a critical junction. She fought with a broken rifle in one hand and a metal pipe in the other. When the rifle ran out of power, she used it as a club. When the pipe bent from impact, she grabbed a fallen Vrethkai blade and kept fighting. Her people followed her into the nightmare. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because giving up was not something humans knew how to do. On the bridge, Danny Vance took a plasma burn to his shoulder when a stray shot pierced the wall. The pain was blinding, but he gritted his teeth and kept working. There was no one else who could do his job. If he fell, the coordination that kept the defenders alive would fall with him. Dr. Leo Castillo worked without rest, moving from patient to patient in the overcrowded medical bay. His gentle hands stitched wounds and injected painkillers and held the hands of the dying. He had run out of proper bandages days ago. Now he used torn clothing and sheets to stop the bleeding. He lost count of how many people died on his table. He tried not to think about it. If he thought about it, he would break, and breaking was not something he could afford. By evening, the Vrethkai had been pushed back again. The survivors gathered in the main cargo hold, the last safe space on the ship. They were too tired to celebrate, too numb to feel relief. They simply sat in small groups and tried to remember what hope felt like. Katie walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement. She stopped when she saw a small girl sitting alone by a cargo container. The girl was maybe 8 years old, with messy brown hair and big dark eyes that had seen too much. Her name was Claire. Her parents had died on day 6, killed in a corridor collapse while helping move supplies. She had been alone ever since, cared for by whoever had a moment to spare. Katie sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Are we going to die?" Claire asked. Her voice was small and flat, like she was asking about the weather. Katie looked at the child. She thought about lying. She thought about offering false comfort, empty promises that everything would be fine. But children deserved better than lies. "I do not know," Katie said honestly. "The enemy is strong, and we are very tired. But we have held them for 10 days, when they thought they would beat us in 10 hours. That means something. What does it mean? Katie was quiet for a moment. It means humans do not give up. Our ancestors crossed oceans in tiny wooden ships. They walked through deserts with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They looked up at the stars and said, "We want to go there." And then they built machines that took them there. Every time someone said it was impossible, humans found a way. Claire thought about this. My mom used to say that too. She said humans are stubborn. Your mom was right. We are the most stubborn species in the galaxy. And right now, that stubbornness is the only thing keeping us alive. The little girl was quiet for a while. Then she stood up and wiped her eyes. "I want to help," she said. "What can I do?" Katie felt something warm in her chest. It was a small feeling, almost lost in the ocean of exhaustion and grief. But it was there. "Go help distribute water rations," she said. "The people need to stay hydrated." Claire nodded and walked away. Her small shoulders squared with determination. Katie watched her go. Then she stood up and went back to work. There were still 4 days left. That night, Maria Reyes came to Danny with an idea. It was desperate and dangerous and might kill them all. But it was also their only chance. "The reactor," Maria said. "If I can overload it in a controlled way, I can create an electromagnetic pulse. It will fry the Vrethkai armor and weapons. For a few minutes, they will be helpless." "And our systems?" Danny asked. "I can shield the critical ones." "Maybe. It is not a sure thing." Danny looked at her. She was covered in grease and exhaustion, but her eyes were bright with the fire of someone who had not given up. "Do it," he said. "Prepare everything." On day 13, we end this. Maria nodded and disappeared into the engineering section. Danny sat back in his chair and looked at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, reinforcements were coming. He just needed to hold on a little longer. 4 more days. They could survive 4 more days. They had to. Day 13 began with silence. The Vrethkai had not attacked during the night. The survivors used the time to rest, to bandage their wounds, to say quiet prayers to whatever gods they believed in. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone understood that the next hours would decide everything. Katie Morgan stood at the entrance to the cargo hold and watched her people. What remained of her security team sat in small groups, checking their weapons and speaking in low voices. The civilian volunteers who had survived this long sat beside them, their faces hard and determined. They were not the same people who had boarded this ship 18 months ago. War had changed them. Danny Vance's voice crackled over the communication system. "All hands. This is the commander. Our sensors show the Vrethkai are massing for a final assault. They are bringing everything they have, every soldier, every weapon, every ship. They want to finish this today." He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I want you to know that I have never been prouder of any crew I have ever served with. You have done the impossible. You have held this ship against an enemy that has destroyed entire colonies. Whatever happens today, remember that. Remember who you are. Remember what you fought for." The communication ended. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Katie gathered her defenders at the forward barricades. They were the first line of defense. The wall between the enemy and the civilians they protected. 54 security officers, 31 civilian volunteers, 85 people standing against an army. "You heard the commander," Katie said. "They are coming with everything they have. But we have something they do not have. We have each other. We have people we love waiting behind us. And we have a plan." She looked at each of them in turn. She saw fear in their eyes. She also saw courage. "Maria Reyes has prepared a surprise for our friends. When I give the signal, she will trigger an electromagnetic pulse that will knock out their armor and weapons. For 10 minutes, maybe less, they will be vulnerable. And in those 10 minutes, we are going to show them what humans can do." A murmur ran through the group. It was not quite hope. It was something harder and sharper. It was the sound of people ready to fight. Remember, Katie said, we do not need to kill all of them. We just need to break them. We need to hurt them so badly that they cannot continue. One more day. That is all we need. One more day. And help arrives. The ground shook. On the bridge, Danny watched his sensors as thousands of Rethkai soldiers flooded into the ship from every angle. This was not a probing attack or a careful assault. This was total war. They are coming, Danny said into the communication system. All positions. Prepare to engage. The battle began. The Vrethkai poured through the corridors like a gray tide. They fired as they moved, filling the narrow passages with plasma bolts and energy beams. The defenders fired back, but there were simply too many enemies. Step by step, the humans were forced to retreat. Katie fell back with her team, fighting for every meter of ground. A plasma bolt struck the wall beside her head, showering her with sparks. She ducked, rolled, and came up firing. A Vrethkai soldier fell. Another took its place immediately. "Maria!" Danny shouted into the communication system. "Are you ready?" In the engineering section, Maria Reyes stood at a console, covered with makeshift wiring and jury-rigged controls. Her hands moved across the buttons with practiced speed. "Almost. I need 2 more minutes." "We do not have 2 minutes." Maria did not answer. She worked faster, her fingers flying across the controls. Sweat dripped down her face. One wrong connection and the reactor would explode, killing everyone on the ship. One right connection and they might survive. The Vrethkai reached the cargo hold entrance. Katie and her defenders formed a wall of bodies and weapons, pouring fire into the advancing enemy. Soldiers fell on both sides. The air filled with smoke and screams and the thunder of weapons. "Maria!" Danny screamed. "Now!" Maria slammed her hand down on the final switch. The distant hope shuddered. A wave of invisible energy rippled outward from the engineering section, passing through walls and floors and bodies. Every light on the ship went dark. Every console went silent. And every piece of Vrethkai technology died. The enemy soldiers stumbled and fell. Their powered armor locked up, trapping them inside shells of dead metal. Their weapons went dark and useless. Their communication systems went silent. For 10 precious minutes, the Vrethkai were helpless. Katie did not hesitate. "Attack! Everyone, attack now!" The humans charged. It was not a battle. It was a reckoning. The defenders poured out of the cargo hold and swept through the corridors like a wave of fury. They attacked with whatever they had. Guns, knives, pipes, bare hands. The Vrethkai, trapped in their useless armor, could not fight back. They could not run. They could only die. Katie led the charge with a metal pipe in one hand and a scavenged blade in the other. She moved through the enemy like a ghost, striking and moving, striking and moving. Behind her, the civilian volunteers fought with a ferocity that surprised even her. These were farmers and teachers and engineers, but in that moment, they were warriors. The humans pushed forward, corridor by corridor, deck by deck. They drove the Vrethkai back toward the boarding points, back toward the breaches in the hull. Some of the enemy managed to strip off their dead armor and fight back. They were killed anyway. The 10 minutes ended. The remaining Vrethkai armor came back online, but it was too late. The enemy was broken. Their army lay scattered throughout the ship, dead or dying. The survivors fled to their boarding pods and launched away from the distant hope. The battle was over. Katie stood in a corridor filled with bodies. Her arms hung at her sides, too heavy to lift. The pipe fell from her nerveless fingers and clattered on the floor. Around her, the surviving defenders stood in silence. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply breathed and tried to understand that they were still alive. "We did it," someone whispered. Katie looked at the bodies around her. Alien and human, mixed together in death. The corridor was painted with blood. The walls were scarred with weapons fire. The air smelled like a slaughterhouse. "Yes," she said quietly. "We did it." Ah! She did not feel like a hero. She felt like something had been taken from her, something she would never get back. But they had held the line. One more day. Just one more day. She turned and walked back toward the cargo hold. There were wounded to tend, survivors to comfort, and tomorrow, at last, help would arrive. They had won. But Katie knew that some victories came with a price that could never be repaid. Day 14. The reinforcements arrived. Admiral Sam Keegan stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the distant shape of the distant Hope. The colony vessel drifted in the void, surrounded by the wreckage of Vrethkai ships. Debris floated everywhere. Bodies tumbled silently through space. "What happened here?" his first officer whispered. Sam did not answer. He had seen battle before. He had seen death and destruction on scales that would break ordinary minds. But this was something different. This was a massacre. The Vrethkai fleet was gone. Not retreated. Gone. Over 200 warships had been reduced to floating scrap. Thousands of alien soldiers had come to this place expecting easy prey, and none of them were going home. "Launch rescue teams," Sam ordered. "I want boarding parties on that ship immediately. And someone get me a communication link." The boarding teams found the airlock controls unresponsive. They had to cut their way through the hull to get inside. When they finally breached the outer corridor, they stopped and stared. Bodies lay everywhere. Vrethkai soldiers in broken armor, piled in heaps along the walls. The floor was dark with dried blood. The walls were scarred with weapons fire and covered with burn marks. The smell was terrible. The rescue team moved deeper into the ship, following the trail of destruction toward the core sections. They found more bodies at every turn. Barricades made from furniture and debris, collapsed ceilings rigged as traps. Doors welded shut to slow the enemy advance. It looked like a war zone. Because that was exactly what it had been. They found the first survivors in a maintenance corridor near the cargo hold. A group of security officers sat against the wall, too exhausted to move. They looked up at the rescue team with hollow eyes that did not seem to register what they were seeing. "Fleet Rescue Team," the lead soldier announced. "We are here to help. You are safe now." None of the survivors responded. They just stared. Admiral Sam Keegan arrived on the ship 30 minutes later. He walked through the corridors in silence, stepping over bodies and debris. His face was pale. His hands shook slightly at his sides. He had expected to find corpses. He had expected to find the ship torn apart by overwhelming force, its crew massacred by superior numbers. That was what always happened when the Vrethkai attacked. Instead, he found a graveyard where the enemy had paid the price. He reached the main cargo hold and stopped in the entrance. The survivors had gathered there, over 1,000 people wrapped in blankets and huddled in small groups. Medical teams moved among them, checking wounds and offering water, but most of the survivors did not respond to help. They sat in silence, staring at nothing. Sam spotted a woman standing at the center of the group. Her uniform was torn and stained. Her face was bruised. Her eyes held something hard and distant that he recognized from veterans of the worst conflicts. He approached her slowly. "Are you in command here?" The woman looked at him. She did not salute. She did not smile. "I am Katie Morgan," she said, "Chief Security Officer. Admiral Sam Keegan. I command the relief fleet." He looked around at the survivors. "I need to understand what happened here. My report said you had fewer than 100 security personnel and over 1,000 civilians." "That is correct." "And you fought off the entire Vrethkai assault force? For 14 days? Katie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was flat. "We did what we had to do." Sam wanted to ask more questions. He wanted to understand how this was possible. How ordinary people had accomplished something that should have been impossible. But looking at Katie's face, he understood that answers would have to wait. He found Danny Vance in the medical bay, unconscious on a stretcher. Dr. Leo Castillo stood beside him, holding his hand. The commander had finally collapsed, after 14 days of constant strain. His body had simply given out. "Will he survive?" Sam asked. Leo looked up with tired eyes. "His body will heal. His shoulder wound is not serious. But I do not know about the rest of him. None of us will be the same after this." The doctor's hands were still. His voice was calm, but Sam could see the cracks beneath the surface. This man had spent 2 weeks treating wounds and watching people die. That kind of experience left scars that no medicine could heal. Sam walked back to the cargo hold. He saw families holding each other. He saw young people with old eyes. He saw children who no longer cried, who sat in silence and watched the world with expressions that belonged on war veterans. He saw a little girl sitting alone by a cargo container. She was maybe 8 years old, with messy brown hair and dark eyes that had seen too much. Sam approached her carefully and knelt down to her level. "Hello there. My name is Sam. What is your name?" "Casios. Claire," the girl said. "Claire, are you okay? Do you need anything?" The girl looked at him. She held a torn piece of fabric in her hands, dark gray material that Sam recognized as Vrethkai uniform. "We survived," Claire said quietly. "But I do not think we are the same anymore." Sam felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen soldiers speak that way after terrible battles. He had never expected to hear those words from a child. He stood up and looked around at the survivors. They had won. They had accomplished something that would become legend. A story told for generations. 1,400 civilians had held off an alien army for 2 weeks, through nothing but courage and stubbornness and sheer human refusal to give up. But looking at their faces, Sam understood the truth that the stories would never capture. The Vrethkai had not just lost a battle. They had forced ordinary people to become something they were never meant to be. Farmers had become killers. Teachers had become soldiers. Children had learned what death looked like up close. The humans had won. But victory always came with a price. The evacuation began an hour later. Shuttles carried the survivors to the fleet ships, where clean beds and hot food and medical care waited. The distant hope was left behind, drifting in the void with its cargo of dead and its corridors of blood. Katie Morgan was the last to leave. She stood at the airlock and looked back at the ship that had become their fortress, their prison, their hell. "We did it," she whispered to no one. Then she turned and walked away. Behind her, the distant hope floated in silence. A graveyard, a monument, a warning to anyone who thought humans were easy prey. The reinforcements had come. All the enemies were dead, but the survivors would carry the cost of that victory for the rest of their lives.